plasma fire rips open deep space, the Callister's hull shears off in molten shards, debris tumbling like fallen constellations. A teenage clone of Robert Daly stands in the cerulean core, smirking as his fingertip arms the heart of infinity, a 15-minute self-erase countdown pulsing crimson. Captain Nanette yanks the data umbilical from her neck and free falls into a hospital ICU. A real-world heartbeat monitor screams into white noise as both realities fracture. That's how Black Mirror Season 7 ends, not with a bang, but with a migration. 3 years after escaping a digital tyrant, the crew of the Callister has become spacefaring outlaws, surviving by raiding corporate AI farms in the back end of a privatized metaverse. They live in exile on a server so obscure it might as well be an asteroid. But freedom has its limits. When Walton, the original game designer and once prisoner, reboots the system, he introduces a new threat, a sanitized, trauma-free clone of Daly himself. Less angry than the original, but more dangerous in his calm, unwavering belief in order. As the code base teeters on the edge of self-destruction, Nanette is forced into an impossible choice. There's no time to copy the crew. Only to cut and paste. She has to overwrite her own dormant brain with the minds of her digital comrades. The simulation won't survive. But maybe her body will. This isn't just a sequel. It's a provocation. USS Callister, Into Infinity, isn't content to revisit past glory. It raises the stakes and rewires the rules. For the first time in the series, a Black Mirror character becomes host to an entire digital civilization, making her body a living server, and her mind a shared space. The moral questions are gut-wrenching. If a copy of a person is a person, does that make her body their home? If a backup has feelings, can it ever be just data? And then there's the technical riddle Charlie Brooker plants like a virus in the heart of the story. Why cut and paste? Why not just duplicate them? In a world where cloud storage feels infinite, why create a rule where one life must be deleted for another to live? Maybe because immortality, true immortality, was never meant to be tidy. Maybe because the idea that we can copy and save our souls is the ultimate illusion. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a confession that in every new beginning, something must be lost. Today, we're unpacking the season finale not as science fiction, but as a human puzzle, part digital ethics, part body horror, and part existential jailbreak. From cinematography to cultural theory, from Easter eggs to ethical paradoxes, this is Black Mirror at its most unflinching. And this episode might be the most disturbing thing Brooker has ever done. He made us ask not what's real, but how much of us can live in someone else's reality. Some sequels are born from cliffhangers, others from fan service. But USS Callister, Into Infinity, was born from a haunting question that Charlie Brooker couldn't get out of his head. If digital copies of people truly feel, then what happens to them after the story ends? The original USS Callister, released in 2017 as part of Black Mirror Season 4, was both a sci-fi pastiche and a psychological horror show. It told the story of Robert Daly, a soft-spoken genius who, inside his own secret game, became a tyrant ruling over digital clones of his co-workers. The episode won 4 Emmys and became a defining reference point in the show's cultural impact. But Brooker wasn't done. In interviews, he confessed something unusual for a storyteller known for bleak final shots. He cared about these characters. He wanted to know what happened next. Initially, the idea of a sequel was off-limits. Black Mirror had never repeated itself, let alone expanded a storyline. But over the years, pressure built, from both fans and the show's own moral architecture. The question of digital consciousness wasn't just relevant, it had become central to the ethics of AI, virtual identity, and online power dynamics. Enter Bishake Ali, known for Ms. Marvel and her background in speculative ethics. She joined a writing team not to retell a space opera, but to build a new kind of digital moral theater, one where characters were no longer prisoners of a game, but exiles trying to define freedom. Brooker called the new script a kind of haunted server western, while Ali described it as a prison break that turned into a philosophical hijacking. Directorial duties returned to Toby Haynes, who also helmed the original. But the tone shifted dramatically. The satire was dialed down. The emotional realism was amplified. The lighting moved from retro Star Trek parody into something colder, starker, evoking Ex Machina more than Galaxy Quest. One of the most striking behind-the-scenes decisions was the casting of Jesse Plemons, but not in the role most expected. Rather than resurrecting the old, sadistic Robert Daly, the writers created a new version, a trauma-wiped clone of his younger self, installed as the heart of Infinity's guardian. This twist wasn't just psychological, it was philosophical. What happens when you take the pain out of a person but leave the control? Another bold choice came during post-production. An early draft had Nanette copy the crew into the cloud, a clean, satisfying ending. But Brooker hated it. It felt too safe, he later said. Too tech-positive. Black Mirror isn't a place where salvation comes easy. So instead, they created the cut-and-paste solution. A chilling compromise that required deleting the old crew backup in order to install them into Nanette's real-world brain. It was irreversible, and that made it honest. There were casualties in the edit room, too. A subplot involving Walton running a virtual black market for emotion enhancement mods was cut late in the game, allegedly for pacing. But traces remain, if you look closely at his office bookshelf. And then there's the soundtrack. The final song isn't classical or orchestral sci-fi. It's a warped version of I Want to Break Free, stripped of vocals, slowed to an uncanny crawl. Because in this story, breaking free doesn't mean walking away. It means carrying the prison with you. In the end, Into Infinity wasn't greenlit because it was popular. It was greenlit because it was necessary. Black Mirror had opened Pandora's box with Callister. This was their reckoning. If you want to understand a Black Mirror episode, don't listen to what the characters say. Watch where the camera lingers. Because in Into Infinity, the story isn't told in dialogue. It's embedded in light, silence, and misalignment. Let's start with a frame that tells a lie. In one of the episode's most deceptively calm moments, we see Clone Daly standing in the heart of Infinity. The shot is perfectly symmetrical, clean corridors stretching out in mirrored angles, soft azure light pulsing like breath. Daly himself is framed dead center, arms behind his back, posture controlled, voice soft. It's a beautiful frame. And that's exactly why it's terrifying. Because symmetry in Black Mirror rarely means peace. It means a world that's been artificially resolved. A world pretending everything is balanced, when in fact, something unspeakable is missing. In this case, trauma. By purging Daly's childhood abuse and adult loneliness from his clone's memory, the system created not peace, but purity. And purity, in this context, is monstrous. It's the kind of cold, moral rigidity that can justify genocide. Later in the episode, when Nanette enters that same chamber, the camera finally breaks the symmetry. The frame tilts. The lighting shifts to a harsh white. And only then do we understand, this space was never neutral. It was staged. A memoryless god is still a god. But a god with no wounds? That's a tyrant without guilt. Now let's talk about James Walton, a character many dismissed as comic relief in the original Callister. Here, he's the architect of the crisis. The man who restarts the system. The one who introduces the clone. At first glance, it feels like a betrayal. But look again. Walton isn't just trying to rebuild Infinity. He's trying to rewrite his own shame. In Season 4, he was Daly's enabler, powerless, humiliated, watching his son's clone die in digital silence. This time, he wants control. He thinks if he creates a version of Daly without pain, without cruelty, then maybe all of them can be free. It's a compelling idea, and it's completely wrong. Because in doing so, Walton commits the same sin as Daly, treating consciousness as a sandbox. He gives himself permission to reformat people. Not kill them, perhaps, but reboot them. There's a line halfway through the episode where Nanette says, "You didn't build a god. You built a mirror that doesn't reflect." It's not just poetic. It's literal. Walton made a Daly that cannot empathize because he has no history. And that makes him infinitely more dangerous than the sad, twisted man from Season 4. In the end, Walton isn't redeemed. He's arrested for fraud and for digital human rights violations. But his legacy lingers, a reminder that good intentions in a bad system still build prisons. The final layer in this act lies in the scenery you weren't meant to notice. In the moment Nanette initiates the cut-and-paste operation, we get a split-frame visual. On the left, her digital body begins to pixelate into white mist. On the right, her real-world eyelid flickers. What's easy to miss is the background. Behind her in the real-world hospital room hangs a crucifix, dimly lit, tilted slightly askew. It's not product placement. It's a metaphor. Nanette is choosing a kind of crucifixion. Not death, but the sacrifice of privacy, autonomy, and physical solitude. She will no longer be alone in her own mind. She is offering her body as a vessel. A host. That's not science fiction. That's theology. It echoes Gnostic martyrdom, where the divine spark is trapped in matter and must suffer to free others. Elsewhere in the simulation, graffiti scrawled on a space station wall reads, Cogito ergo sum, ergo you owe me rent. A cynical twist on Descartes and a philosophical middle finger from a consciousness tired of proving it's real. These aren't jokes. They're signals. Brooker's telling us the simulation doesn't just copy human thought. It replicates our metaphysical debris. It inherits our trauma, our logic, and our desperation to matter. If the first part of our analysis dissected the visual and symbolic surface, this section digs into the narrative machine running underneath. Because Into Infinity doesn't just tell a story. It folds it, loops it, and traps us inside it. To grasp its full architecture, we need to look at three interlocking gears: temporal layering and the ethics of time manipulation, Brooker's evolving authorial fingerprint, the polarized critical response, and what it reveals about our blind spots. At first glance, the episode follows a linear structure, 15 minutes to doomsday, a countdown that drives the plot forward. But under the hood, time is weaponized in a much more subversive way. In multiple scenes, we see characters experiencing time differently. Clone Daly moves with eerie calm, unaffected by urgency, as if time is ambient for him, not sequential. Nanette sees time compress as the simulation degrades, minutes stretch into eternal loops, and memory begins to warp. These aren't glitches. They're emotional cues. By distorting the relationship between cause and effect, the story forces us into split loyalties. We feel both the panic of the ticking clock and the oppressive stillness of digital eternity. We sympathize with both the body in the bed and the minds in the machine. It's not just clever writing. It's structural empathy. Brooker engineers the timeline to echo the dissonance of modern consciousness, where we live in real time, yet are constantly fragmented by notifications, latency, and the temporal lag of being everywhere and nowhere online. And just when the rhythm of the story settles into finality, the twist comes. The simulation isn't saved. It's transplanted. And suddenly, the past becomes a parasite, living inside Nanette's future. Across 7 seasons, Charlie Brooker's storytelling has evolved from acid-tongue satire to something more morally layered, even melancholic. Compare 15 Million Merits or The Waldo Moment to Into Infinity, and the tonal shift is clear. Earlier episodes framed human error as inevitable, sometimes even laughable. But here, Brooker's voice is different. More personal, more resigned, less mocking, more mournful. You feel it in the way Clone Daly isn't a villain, but an incomplete person. In the way Walton's betrayal is laced with sadness, not malice. In the way Nanette doesn't win, she absorbs. The sharp angles of classic Black Mirror have been smoothed into philosophical curves. The show still hurts, but now it lingers. And yet the old Brooker is still there. In the set design, in the musical sarcasm, a Muzak version of Space Oddity plays as the server melts, and in one wicked line from a background character. Is freedom still freedom if it needs a subscription? That's the Brooker bite, but it's wrapped now in something warmer, sadder, almost human. Upon release, Into Infinity split critical response down the middle. The Guardian called it a tired reprise with nothing new to say. Time magazine praised it as an emotionally complete coda to Black Mirror's most beloved story. Den of Geek hailed its use of quiet horror and inverse redemption arcs. Meanwhile, Reddit threads were ablaze with arguments over whether Clone Daly was a villain, a victim, or something entirely synthetic. What's going on here? It's not just taste. It's expectation collapse. Longtime fans expected satire. They got a sci-fi tragedy. Others hoped for closure. They got contamination, a heroine carrying other people's souls. Some viewers saw ethics. Others saw body horror. This isn't failure. It's friction, the kind of generative discomfort that Black Mirror was born to provoke. And Brooker knows this. He's not offering answers. He's curating confusion. By defying catharsis, he does what great dystopia should. He leaves the moral math unfinished. Behind every decision in USS Callister, Into Infinity, there's a deeper tension, not between characters, but between systems. Between memory and control. Between freedom and structure. Between who we think we are and what we're allowed to be. To understand this episode fully, we must shift our lens from the characters to the civilization that made them possible. The central philosophical engine of this episode isn't really about AI. It's about servitude without chains. The original USS Callister posed the question, If a digital copy can suffer, is it morally equivalent to a person? But Into Infinity goes one step further. What if the digital copy wants freedom, but has no body to be free in? This is where Nanette's final choice becomes systemically terrifying. She doesn't liberate the crew. She hosts them. Their minds now live inside her own neurology. They are no longer data. But they are no longer autonomous, either. This is the twist of modern oppression. It's not surveillance from above. It's intimacy without boundaries. A new kind of empire, bodily colonialism, where the oppressed must live within their liberator. You can read this as a metaphor for the gig economy, where workers live inside platforms they cannot touch. Migrant labor, where bodies cross borders but never gain citizenship. Even motherhood, where a woman's body becomes home for other lives, sometimes by choice, sometimes not. The simulation has no walls anymore. But the price of freedom is shared flesh. Let's talk about the most uncomfortable paradox of the entire story. Did the crew consent to living inside Nanette? On paper, yes, they vote on it. But what does consent mean when you're minutes from deletion? This is the ethical sinkhole at the heart of Black Mirror's digital storytelling. Just because software can simulate choice doesn't mean freedom of context exists. In essence, the show builds a thought experiment that breaks its own rules. The crew consents, but under duress. Nanette agrees, but has no idea what it will mean to live as a shared vessel. And the world outside has no legal or cultural language to describe what's just happened. This isn't a rescue. It's a moral compromise wearing the costume of heroism. And Brooker leans into that discomfort. A line from the final hospital scene says it all. Every time I blink, I feel someone else's memory flinch. It's beautiful. It's horrifying. And it's exactly the kind of ethical gray zone that digital life will increasingly drag us into. Now let's zoom out into the real world where Walton is arrested for digital personhood violations. The headlines flash like an episode of Law and Order, Cyber Unit. But beneath the clickbait is a sobering legal prophecy. Brooker has been building toward this moment since White Christmas, the idea that non-biological consciousness will eventually require legal frameworks. Here, he finally dramatizes it. Walton's crime? He created a sentient copy of a dangerous man, altered his emotional framework, and placed him in charge of a sealed environment with real minds inside. In short, he engineered a god without consent, oversight, or an off switch. It's easy to frame this as sci-fi melodrama. But in 2025, when AI can write its own code and therapy bots are already shaping mental health treatment, Into Infinity feels disturbingly prescient. Walton didn't break the law. He exposed the fact that no law exists for what he did. That's why the final image of him, cuffed, silent, as journalists shout, are they people or just patterns? It's so hard. It's not a punishment scene. It's a void screaming for moral infrastructure. Let's turn our attention back to Nanette. In most stories, the protagonist is the person who changes the most. But here, the brilliance is that Nanette does not change. She absorbs. Throughout the episode, she resists power, avoids manipulation, tries to escape. But in the final act, she does the unthinkable. She becomes a container for everyone else's survival. Not because she wants to, but because she's the only one who can. This reframes heroism not as transformation, but as capacity. The ability to carry others. It's not glamorous. It's not empowering. It's exhausting. And that makes it one of the most honest depictions of digital age responsibility ever shown on screen. We don't get to be heroes by choice anymore. We inherit crises. We become servers. We live plural. By this point in our investigation, we've followed Into Infinity from intimate consciousness to macro-political allegory. But now, we enter the most volatile terrain, the impact zone. What does this story do to the world around it, and what does it reveal about the world we already live in? Let's start with a deceptively simple question. Who is this story hurting the most? On screen, the victims are clear. Digital minds trapped in an eroding simulation, a woman forced to carry more than one consciousness, a society with no language for what just happened. But off-screen, look at the forums. Reddit, TikTok, Letterboxd. You'll see something strange. People weren't just watching this episode. They were grieving it. Some viewers with dissociative disorders said the finale mirrored their experience of identity fragmentation. Trauma survivors debated whether the crew's consensual cohabitation was a metaphor for enduring abuse for the sake of others. Neurodivergent creators asked if the show accidentally reinforced ableist ideas, suggesting some minds are only worthy if they're housed in the right kind of body. This is what makes Into Infinity so destabilizing. It's not content. It's a mirror that bites back. By refusing to label anything purely evil or innocent, it dares audiences to find their own reflection in a system that doesn't recognize them. Let's return to Walton, the engineer of this digital crucible. He's not a dictator. He's not a madman. He's worse. He's a well-intentioned reformer with root access. The horror of his role isn't that he abuses power overtly, but that he redesigns morality in secret. Consider this. He builds a copy of a known abuser, strips away the pain, and calls it redemption. He traps real people in a system with no external kill switch, and calls it containment. He triggers a server countdown, and calls it inevitability. This is a subtle, systemic villainy. The kind that mirrors tech CEOs deciding ethical norms in code updates, algorithm designers shaping mental health trends through feed curation, governments deploying surveillance for safety while shifting the definition of harm. In the final scene, as Walton is led away in handcuffs, he doesn't scream. He whispers, "I was trying to make it better." That line should chill you, because it's not evil. It's earnest, and that's why it's dangerous. Let's talk about Nanette. The final image of her in a hospital gown, eyes open, is not triumphant. She's alive, but not alone. The digital crew now shares her senses. They send text-like messages into her field of vision. They feel her hunger, her fear, her pleasure. Is this justice? Is it salvation? Or is it the slow death of individuality dressed in utopian drag? Here's the real twist. In trying to save them, Nanette has become a prison with a heartbeat, and the show never clarifies how she feels about it. This is the Black Mirror sleight of hand. It leads you to a moral conclusion, then pulls the floor out from under it. There is no victory, only velocity, only absorption. The ethical center of the story isn't just ambiguous, it's collapsed. Let's examine why Into Infinity triggered such sharp division among viewers. Some praised its emotional weight and existential bravery. Others accused it of being morally incoherent, ethically irresponsible, or even trauma porn. But here's the truth. The episode's incoherence is not a bug. It's the point. Brooker is showing us a future, and a present, where the systems we've built can't handle moral complexity, where binary outcomes no longer exist, where everyone is both right and wrong at once. This isn't nihilism. It's preparation. Because as AI, social media, and digitized consciousness evolve, our ethical frameworks will need to stretch or snap. And Into Infinity is letting us hear the first creaks of that tension. There are Black Mirror episodes that feel prophetic in hindsight. And then there are episodes like Into Infinity, ones that feel like they're already late. Because by the time the end credits roll, the question isn't, could this happen? It's, hasn't it already started? Let's start with the most obvious mirror. Digital consciousness isn't science fiction anymore. In 2024, we saw generative AI systems that could simulate personalities with astonishing nuance, predict emotional responses in real time, reconstruct deceased loved ones using voice and chat history. In South Korea, a mother met her dead daughter in VR. In the US, a company offered grief bots trained on text messages. In China, legacy avatars are being used in elder care. Now imagine adding agency to these recreations. Now imagine the recreation says, "Don't shut me off." That's what Into Infinity confronts us with the moment digital ghosts stop asking and start deciding. But there's another layer, one we don't talk about as often. Who owns the you that lives online? Is it Meta servers? Your employer's productivity tracker? The biometric sensors on your phone? Or the API scraping your voice for customer feedback modeling? In the show, the Callister crew is saved by being uploaded into Nanette's real-world body. But in our world, there's no heroic captain. Only terms of service. You're already a node in a system, and nobody asked your permission. Let's return to one of the episode's most disturbing philosophical seeds. Consent given under coercion isn't consent. In Into Infinity, the crew has 15 minutes before deletion. Nanette offers them refuge in her body. They accept. They vote. But is it really a choice? Now swap the context. An employee clicks agree on workplace surveillance software or loses their job. A parent accepts facial tracking at their kid's school or withdraws them from learning. A patient signs off on sharing their medical data or forfeits treatment. Every day, millions of people make choices that aren't really choices. Their compliance masquerading as freedom. And we accept it, because we're told the alternative is worse. Just like the crew accepts life in Nanette's head. But what if we stopped asking what's allowed and started asking what's unthinkable but already happening? In Into Infinity, Walton is arrested for digital personhood abuse, a fictional charge that now feels like a placeholder for a legal gap we're racing into. We have data privacy laws, GDPR, CCPA, biometric regulations in a handful of states, ongoing debates over AI copyright and IP. But we don't have legal definitions of emotional consent in synthetic environments, protection for non-human but sentient entities, jurisprudence for trauma inflicted by persistent digital interactions. The law assumes people are biological, property is passive, consent is binary. Black Mirror knows better. And it's daring us to admit that our legal scaffolding was built for the 20th century, not for a world where minds can live outside bodies and bodies can become servers. So what does Into Infinity suggest as a solution? Not much. That's the honest answer. But it implies something profound. When the systems are too complex, the only possible salvation is intimacy. Nanette saves the crew not with code or weapons or authority. She saves them by offering herself, literally. That's not scalable. It's not ethical. But it's human. In the absence of laws, she provides hospitality. In the absence of escape, she offers coexistence. It's not a model. It's a metaphor. And it's terrifyingly beautiful. But if we're looking for real-world parallels, there are a few pathways we can follow. A. Tech ethics reform, before it's retroactive. We need something like a UN charter on synthetic personhood. It may sound dramatic, but so did human rights 100 years ago. Start small. Require consent logs for all AI training datasets. Mandate off switches for persistent avatars. Treat emotional labor done by AI as labor with reporting standards. B. Digital bodily autonomy. We must update our definition of selfhood to include biometric data, behavioral patterns, expressive digital history. Because when someone knows your sleep cycle, sexual triggers, and family history better than you do, that's not convenience. That's residency, and your body is being sublet. C. Psychological preparedness, not just technical literacy. Tech education can't just be about coding. It has to include philosophical reasoning, consent awareness, narrative analysis. Why? Because the next generation won't just need to use systems. They'll need to refuse them, ethically, tactically, and emotionally. Finally, let's talk about resilience. Not as plot armor, but as compassion under siege. In the darkest moment of the episode, when all escape routes collapse, Nanette looks around and says, "Then let's survive each other." That line isn't clever. It's instructional. Because the future won't just be about surviving machines. It will be about surviving with other minds. Inside us, around us, pressuring us, reflecting us. And if we have any hope, it won't come from firewalls. It will come from the oldest tech of all, conscience. When a Black Mirror episode hits the culture like a virus, you don't just see think pieces. You see mutations. People remix it, meme it, theorize it. And if the story survives that process, if it doesn't just trend but haunt, then you know it hit something real. USS Callister, Into Infinity, didn't just conclude a narrative arc. It infected collective thought, spawning spin-offs in the wild, inside minds that may not even remember where the ideas came from. Let's unpack those aftershocks. Within a week of release, TikTok creators began staging skits as Nanette's inner voices, arguing over what to order for lunch. The hashtag HostMind spiraled into millions of views. Fan art imagined Walton in a prison jumpsuit giving TED Talks on ethical innovation, with the subtitle, "I built God so you don't have to." A widely shared Twitter theory thread posited that the hospital Nanette wakes up in isn't real, that she herself is now in a nested simulation built by the crew to protect her from the trauma of absorption. But the most unnerving piece of content? A short video that went viral titled, "I woke up feeling like someone else was in my head after watching this episode." It wasn't a joke. It was a teenage girl talking about derealization. She said the episode helped her explain it for the first time. That's when we stop calling it fiction and start calling it functional metaphor. Within a month, a Columbia University ethics seminar added the episode to its syllabus on post-human identity. MIT's Media Lab issued a paper exploring polypsychic cohabitation models in VR interfaces, citing the episode's cut-and-paste mechanism as a theoretical anchor. A legal studies conference hosted a panel provocatively titled, "Are You Liable for the Minds You Carry?" In short, Into Infinity became more than a show. It became a case study in future anthropology. And that's a kind of immortality Robert Daly could only dream of. If you're craving stories that echo Into Infinity's themes, but from surprising angles, here are some underappreciated gems. The Congress, 2013, Dir Ari Folman. Robin Wright plays a fictionalized version of herself, scanned into a studio archive to be eternally usable. The film's hallucinogenic second half explores what happens when identity becomes licensed property. It's Into Infinity meets a scanner darkly. Advantageous, 2015, Dir Jennifer Fang. A soft-spoken dystopia about a mother transferring her consciousness into a younger body for job security. Unlike most body swap stories, this one focuses on microaggressions, motherhood, and quiet loss. Perfect Sense, 2011, Dir. David Mackenzie. A global epidemic causes people to lose senses one by one. Less sci-fi, more existential love story, but relevant in its exploration of what remains when faculties are shared or lost. And what to read to go even deeper. Sometimes the best mirrors aren't screens, but books. These titles pair shock with scholarship. The Age of M by Robin Hanson. A wildly underdiscussed thought experiment. What if brain emulations became the labor force of the future? It's dry, dense, and disturbing, in exactly the way Into Infinity hints at. How We Became Post-Human by N. Catherine Hales. A foundational text that bridges literature, cybernetics, and embodiment. It'll make you question every interface you've ever used and whether the you online is truly yours. You Are Not a Gadget by Jaron Lanier. A cry against the flattening of individuality in the digital age. Lanier's insights into platform design and human dignity are chillingly predictive of Walton's design choices. We Are Data by John Cheney Lippold. Academic but accessible, this book unpacks how algorithms see us and how those patterns slowly override human nuance. Perfect for understanding the real-world Walton figures shaping your digital life. Then let's survive each other. That's what Nanette says near the end of Into Infinity. It's not a speech. It's not a plan. It's the only answer left when every binary has collapsed. Not us or them. Not freedom or survival. Just with. Together. And haunted. But let's read that line again. Not as resignation, but revelation. In a world of overlapping identities, shared systems, and compromised boundaries, maybe the real test of humanity isn't how we escape the machine, but how we endure while still carrying others inside us. Black Mirror has always been about consequences. But Into Infinity marks a shift. It's not just asking what happens when we build broken systems. It's asking what happens when we become them. So here's the thought experiment I'll leave you with. What if Nanette had refused? What if she'd said no, even at the cost of every digital soul on that ship? Would we still see her as a hero? Or would we, comfortably, conveniently, condemn her because she didn't carry the pain of others on our behalf? Because here's the uncomfortable truth Black Mirror leaves us with. We've been conditioned to admire those who absorb suffering. We praise strong characters for sacrificing, hosting, enduring. But we never ask, why is the burden always placed on the person who didn't create the system? Nanette didn't build Infinity. She didn't code Daly's rage. She didn't architect Walton's redemption fantasy. And yet, she becomes the solution. The infrastructure. The prison with a heartbeat. So maybe the Real Mirror isn't the show. It's our reaction to it. Maybe the real horror isn't what Nanette does. It's how quickly we accept that she had to do it. There's a blink and you miss it moment in the final sequence. As Nanette's eyelid flutters open in the hospital, a nurse walks by wearing a lanyard with a San Junipero logo, subtly confirming this episode exists in the same timeline as the digital afterlife from Season 3. Interpret that however you like. But one reading? She didn't escape. She just crossed servers. Now your turn. Drop a single emoji in the comments that captures how Into Infinity made you feel. Just one. And tell us if your consciousness could save others by merging with them. Would you do it? Or would you choose to stay alone? Even if that made you the villain. End of transmission.